Good afternoon and welcome to the 20th annual exhibit of hydrogen and fuel cells, and we've added batteries, that means all storage as well, to our equation here. We've been here for quite some time discussing the national and international fuel cell issues, which are energy issues. And we are happy to welcome three specialists in this field who have innovated takes on how much we can save and what we can do to make the grid more successful, and what that all involves. To my left, we welcome Dr. David Hodgson, who is UKTI sector specialist at UK Trade and Investment. Next to him, in the middle, is Mark Sprawson, who's responsible for smart grid activity at EA Technology. And at the end, from Berlin, my hometown, please welcome Björn, who's responsible for sales at Younicos. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start this topic. Of course, we're following a presentation here, so I had the advantage of listening to longer presentations from all of you in a less discursive, more technical forum, which is our technical forum, on the conversational level. Perhaps, David, you could give us a brief resume of what issues you're addressing right now.
Well, we're talking really about the changes that are happening on the electricity network largely here, but it's driven by the decarbonisation agenda that we have in the UK to reduce our CO2 emissions, which we set ourselves some legally binding targets. The low carbon projects that we have put in place, particularly around offshore and onshore wind, solar PV, all of which are significantly increasing their penetration rate into the UK electricity supply area, are placing new and increasing challenges on the transmission and distribution of electricity. That, combined with the fact that our distribution network does need significant investment to go through, we have some choices to make about how we make those investments and what we deploy onto the network. So we can go and improve the operability of the network with these changes that are happening on the distribution, on generation rather. We could use conventional solutions, or we could use some smarter technologies, and energy storage being one of those. And the challenge really is, how do we make them cost effective so that we balance out the decarbonisation programme with security of supply and with the costs of making all these changes happen. But we're seeing this significantly, we've seen this happen already. We have some parts of the UK with significant penetration of solar PV on the low voltage network, which are causing some voltage compliance issues. And actually, in the context of this discussion, we're seeing storage being deployed as a way of solving and dealing with those issues.
Yeah. Mark, your brief presentation?
Sure. Well, we're heavily involved in making sure that the path that David's just described to a lower carbon Great Britain is one that we go along in a structured way. So we're working very closely with some bodies that are looking to bring together all of the stakeholders to make sure that all of the learning is shared. So there's the Smart Grid Forum, which is run by government and by the regulator Ofgem, which has all the network operators and some manufacturers and other interested parties like ourselves on board. And that's really great, because it means that we can take all the learning from projects that are going on and make sure it's all condensed and is shared so that we can all go on the journey together. I'd like to point out with storage particularly as well, we run a forum called the Energy Storage Operators Forum, which is again an organisation where all the distribution network operators are involved, as are DEC of the government and the regulator. And it means that we're taking the learning from all of the projects that are in flight at the moment for different storage technologies in different network locations, and sharing the learning between all stakeholders such that that can be taken forward so that the right solution can be identified for the right problem. Because it's pointless us carrying on in a kind of haphazard way where we just try things out. We need to somehow bring all that together. And that's led to the development of our Storage Good Practice Guide, which is going to ultimately act as a kind of manual for storage operators within the UK to basically understand what networks are looking for, from procurement issues, installation, commissioning, operation, the whole kind of life cycle. So I feel this kind of joined up approach where all the stakeholders get together is the key to solving this problem.
Björn?
Basically here from the industry side, we are working currently at the implementation of one large-scale storage project in the UK. It's a 6 megawatt, 10 megawatt hours battery system. We're working there with SNC and UK Power Networks. So Younicos is working as a system integrator, taking care of the operation of the system, the software logics, the communication. So the integral parts which keep everything together. And this is basically a project which is in this learning context that was just described, where the UK has a very straightforward way of gathering all the information on the first storage projects to really find out how storage can be deployed, what kind of challenges are there from a technical side, from a commercial side, from a regulatory side, and I think it's a very good way forward, and we are participating in this project and learning also a lot from this, and we think that we can go forward from there to other large-scale projects in the UK.
Now, I've heard a lot recently about the rise of agnosticism, of course. Now, I'm not talking about the religious side of this. I heard this term, technology agnostic, at least 3 times listening to all of you speaking. What we're talking about basically here is that with the advent and increasing use of renewable energy, the issues become more flexible. We're moving away from conventional forms of creating energy. And there's also the issue, which David, you mentioned about how much energy the grid itself wastes in its current construction. So there's various ways of approaching this. But for me, the question is, particularly because I usually have talks with people who are marketing a specific form of solution, that is a technology, why is it important for you to remain technology agnostic? What are the options that you'd like to keep open with this term?
Well, from a government perspective, we're completely technology agnostic. What we're looking to do is provide the right kind of frameworks that give both the network operators and technology providers who supply the network operators the opportunity to play in a range of markets. So there's a new regulatory regime which we have launched for transmission and distribution of gas and electricity, which incentivizes operators on the basis of outcomes. So it's an outcome-driven regulatory regime. We're calling it RIO. It's revenue equals incentives, innovation, and outputs. And it really is about delivering the right kind of outputs, both for the low-carbon context that we're operating within, but also to achieve the right kind of consumer costs, the prices that are charged to consumers. And within that, we want to ensure that we're developing the right kind of framework for innovation, that we develop the right kind of regulatory framework for new technologies to be able to play the right kind of role in that regulatory framework. And we're also giving network operators an 8-year period for their planning. So it's a relatively long time scale. They can do some proper strategic work, proper strategic engagement, and the industry as a whole can gain some confidence in the way that they can deploy their products and solutions.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, technology agnosticism is something that's very important for network operators because they don't want to be seen to be favouring one technology or one provider too early. Effectively, what they want to be able to have is a range of options available to them and to be able to evaluate all of those options. So through the use of the transform model, which I was discussing in the presentation earlier, it actually allows us to have a common framework whereby you can evaluate one storage solution against another storage solution, but also against another type of solution, a demand-side response contract or a real-time rating solution. And by doing all of this, what you can do is you can actually ensure that you get the optimal deployment of solutions onto your network, which means you're spending the least that you have to still have an economically efficient network. So that, I think that kind of agnosticism and that being open to all technologies is incredibly important as we move forward.
And yet we're still talking about the commercialization of energy storage. Björn, do you have any stake in a particular type of storage technology?
Well, we are currently, from the project that we are working on, focusing a lot on short-term energy storage, mainly lithium-ion battery storage technologies with a storage capacity of 1 hour or half an hour, because the most important point there at the current stage of the integration of storage is the provision of services, of the power and the grid services that can be provided by the power electronics and the battery in combination. This is a critical issue right now in the integration of renewable energies. But for the greater goal of really going forward with more renewable energies in the system, there's again not one technology which is to be favored. Different technologies have different advantages and disadvantages. Same as you would not say go forward only with wind or only with PV. It's the same in the storage and in all those grid services, that it's a combination of different technologies and also different storage technologies. This is very important in the projects that you do, that you keep this in mind already in the first steps, that you don't have a dead-end technology which does not allow to add other additional storage technologies on there. So what we are doing, for example, is really providing a system where different storage technologies, for example, sodium-sulfur batteries or Zebra batteries or lithium-ion batteries, can be operated alongside and can be increased easily in a modular way. So this is the same as is the case with totally different grid technologies, which can sometimes be more advantageous than storage technology. It's also important to see which kind of storage technology in which stage of the integration and for which application you're going to use. So in this case, we also try to be as much as possible technology agnostics.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity at a forum like this, not occasionally to disagree with fellow panel members. On this occasion, I'm going to disagree with myself. And when we just say we don't pick winners and we're technology agnostic, UK government is very, very keen and supportive of the idea that we can bring a range of technologies through different levels of maturity so that they're able to compete on a level playing field. A great example of that is the upcoming capacity market that the UK is developing. And the capacity market is very much there to build capacity to allow us to deal with times when we have low wind supply or when the sun isn't shining. So more conventional or other ways of managing the energy supply. The capacity market will launch this year with a first auction for provision of capacity in December, actually for delivery of capacity in 18-19. But we largely think that because of the maturity that those auction prices will be much lower for technologies such as open cycle gas turbines, combined cycle plant, because they are much more mature. What we want to see is that we can have everything competing on a level playing field, and so in 2015 and in 2016 we will have 2 transitional measure auctions specifically addressing capacity provided by energy storage and demand side response. And this will build capability in that sector, and then such in the future auctions they will be able to compete because they have got that greater maturity and taken some cost out of their development. So it is very much a framework and an ecosystem of supporting research, development, demonstration, and then early stage commercial deployment to be able to bring technologies forward to compete with more conventional solutions.
I should add that we can take questions from the audience. If anyone does have a question, raise your hand and I'll bring you a microphone.
Could I ask a question about using lithium-ion batteries? Sure. Are you working on the assumption that there will be an industry created just to make lithium-ion batteries for storage, or are you looking at second life use of lithium-ion batteries from automotive, but they won't be around for about 6 years? Because currently there isn't the capacity for both storage and automotive.
Well, the short answer to this is that we're basically riding on the wave of the capacity. How do I say? Okay, there was an expectation in the EV market which was not fulfilled. So battery manufacturers have been looking for other ways to deploy their batteries, and grid-scale battery storage was one solution of this. This is very advantageous for us because the batteries have decreased massively in price right now. So the lithium-ion batteries are for these applications the most promising technology at the moment. But as I said, it's not so much about one particular battery technology. It's about the optimal battery technology from commercial and technological point of view at the stage in the transition and for a certain application. So at the moment we are basically not looking at second life batteries, which will definitely be a very interesting market in a couple of years, because you still have like 80% of the capacity and almost all of the power available at the batteries that come from this EV system. So this is for the transition time. This would be like new lithium-ion battery systems.
But I would add to that the option to use second life batteries is very important, because those batteries will have to be recycled at some point, and squeezing some extra life out of them makes some sound commercial sense. So there have been a number of government-funded programs in the UK to look at some paper studies initially to look at the feasibility of using second life batteries from automotive use, but now actually also a fully funded demonstration program to take second life electric vehicle batteries and put them onto the grid and look at the cell management, the battery management and the system integration issues to see what the challenges are to be able to utilize those systems in the future.
To get onto the complexity of this issue, when we were preparing for this discussion, for the first time I realized there's an entirely different take here in one term. That is, usually when we talk about smart grids, and this was the point that you raised, we talk about smart grids from the supply side. That is, let's pretend we have a community of homes, everyone has their own PEM cell, and when I turn on my hairdryer, if I turn on all my electrical devices at one time, I'm going to have a peak demand, so my neighbor's going to have to turn his stuff on to supply that. This is very supply-side driven approaches to a smart grid. Now, what you said, Mark, which was so enlightening for me, is let's look at the demand side, because basically when we talk about the nature of the batteries used, it really depends on how large are the peaks that we have to cover, the peak demands, what type of grid structure we're dealing with, and of course this grid structure itself is in flux so quickly. The project you're dealing with is from 2015 to 2023. In that span of time, we can expect developments on the grid side. So I suppose I'm asking Mark, when you approach this from the demand side of a smart grid, how do you envision the development of the smart grid structure and the influence that's going to have on the technologies it requires?
Sure. Well, clearly, as you've just articulated, the smart grid is an incredibly complex beast, which has a number of actors within it. And what we have to try and be clear on is to try and make sure that all of those actors are working together rather than against each other. So in the UK, we have an incredibly complex kind of value chain for the electricity sector, with transmission, distribution, suppliers, generators, all being unbundled, and they all want a piece of the action. But there's a very real risk that actually we could be acting against each other. A good example of this is things like time of use tariffs. So if you have time of use tariffs, well, the suppliers want to sell lots of electricity when the wind is blowing really hard, because it's cheap, which is great. However, if the wind's blowing really hard at sort of 6 p.m. kind of time, that's the time when all the local distribution networks are looking for constraint management, and they're looking actually people to use less electricity. So it's about how we join those things up and try and get those to work together is a real challenge. And some of the ways of doing that are storage is a key one, and also looking at demand management of certain loads. So we can use storage, and we can also use things like smart charging of electric vehicles. So we're currently looking at a project where we have 200 electric vehicles rolled out in clusters, where you've got 10 electric vehicles down one street. And the idea is you have to say, well, okay, if all of those vehicles were charging simultaneously at 6 p.m. on top of all the other demand that's already there, you'd probably find you had a constraint issue on your local grid. Instead, we can smartly charge those vehicles by cycling them or by reducing the overall amount of consumption they can take to make sure we stay within the limits. And the alternative to doing that is essentially going and putting a new cable down the streets, which is the inconvenience, the cost. It's not attractive to anybody, except perhaps cable manufacturers, but no one else really wants to see that. So it's very difficult for us to try and bring all these things together. So getting all those actors to talk to each other is, again, one of the really key visions that the UK is leading on with its development of committees like the Smart Grid Forum to ensure that everybody gets a fair say.
Maybe just to add a little bit, this is not only important that the actors speak to each other, but that they are able, on a technological basis, to speak to each other, to have clear standards and in the communication protocols with all those different actors. Yep. So that you actually can have an overarching intelligence which can work with all these different actors. And I think they are also this kind of these research projects which really talk to many different players in the UK, so it's a good way forward to establish these kinds of standards.
We are unfortunately out of time, but obviously we'll have to continue this conversation on the sidelines. It's been fascinating. The one big message I've noted is that the UK is at the forefront of dealing with this transitional period. From 2015 to 2023, we can expect a lot of interesting developments and also a lot of interesting innovations and implementations because it's become a mandate. So it's a thrilling thing to know that something's happening there. And Europe will have to catch up. On that note, I'd like to thank Dr. David Hodgson, next to me here from UKTI, Sector Specialist for the UK Trade and Investment, Mark Sprawson, who's responsible for smart grid activity at EA Technology, and Björn Long, who's for sales at Younicos in Berlin, my hometown. Thank you for joining us. Continue the conversation with them, please. And it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.